A judge helps cops frame an innocent black woman, unaware she's a high-ranking FBI agent. They say justice is blind, but in the quiet town of Grand Oak Falls, it seems justice has been peeking through a narrow, hateful lens. Judge Marcus Sinclair, a man of lofty legal repute and deep-seated prejudice, has woven a web of lies alongside corrupt officers, unaware that their newest target is not just another victim. Kendra Thompson, a poised and unassuming black woman, is about to show them the real power she wields. As Grand Oak Falls prepares for the trial of the century, all eyes are on a small courtroom that's about to explode with secrets, betrayals, and one shocking revelation after another. Grand Oak Falls was not the kind of place one found on tourist maps. Tucked between rolling hills and a winding river that glimmered only at sunrise, it had a nostalgic quality that charmed some and stifled others. A single stretch of road formed the downtown area, lined with antique stores, a diner, and a row of American flags that flapped lazily in the humid southern breeze. People here knew each other, for better or worse, and tradition held a powerful grip on everyday life. Overseeing much of that tradition, especially in matters of law, was Judge Marcus Sinclair. He presided in a county courthouse that looked like a relic from the 19th century, tall columns, wide marble steps, and an imposing statue of Lady Justice at the entrance. Inside, the dull hum of overhead lights illuminated weathered pews and scuffed floors that had witnessed countless pleas, confessions, and convictions. Here, Judge Sinclair wielded his gavel like a scepter. At 65, Sinclair was a pillar in the community, or so the old guard claimed. He came from a line of men who believed that status was something one inherited. He walked with a slight limp, the result of an old hunting accident, and his face carried the perpetual scowl of a man who expected the world to bow to his opinions. Local gossip hinted at his prejudice, but official complaints against him were few and far between. Those who found themselves on the wrong side of Sinclair's bench rarely had the resources to fight back, and if they did, they often lacked the courage because appealing a verdict would mean stepping on toes in a town that disliked troublemakers. Behind the judge's veneer of respectability lay years of simmering intolerance. He prided himself on cleaning up the streets and giving punks the maximum penalty. More often than not, those punks were people of color, pulled over for minor infractions that somehow ballooned into serious charges, disturbing the peace, resisting arrest, or assaulting an officer. Complaints of racial bias were dismissed by Sinclair with an incredulous laugh or a wave of his hand. After all, in the eyes of most town leaders, Judge Sinclair was a decent man upholding the law. But the judge's reputation was not built on an island. Local law enforcement played its part. Officer Carl Stone and Deputy Martin Jacobs, longtime friends of Sinclair, manned the Grand Oak Falls Police Department. They were the ones who had eyes in every alley and ears in every bar. Stone, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a hairline retreating faster than a summer storm, had a track record of harassing minority drivers for trivial reasons, from tinted windows to suspicious behavior. Jacobs, slightly younger and quieter, seemed content to follow Stone's lead, rarely questioning the tactics they employed. Over the years, the police and Judge Sinclair formed a seamless pipeline. Stone and Jacobs would arrest people they deemed trouble, and the judge would swiftly convict. It was a system that had gone unchecked for far too long. And so, when Kendra Thompson rolled into town for what was supposed to be a routine visit to a friend, she unknowingly stepped onto a well-oiled conveyor belt of injustice. Kendra was a graceful woman in her mid-30s. She carried herself with a calm confidence, dressed simply in a crisp blouse and tailored trousers. Her eyes sparkled with both warmth and quiet determination. Standing at about 5'6", she didn't look intimidating, nor did she look like someone who would prompt immediate suspicion. But in a place like Grand Oak Falls, where blackness itself was all too often construed as suspicious, she quickly caught the attention of Stone and Jacobs. They first noticed Kendra when she stopped at the local diner for lunch, parked carefully between two vintage pickup trucks. As she sipped her iced tea and scanned a newspaper left behind by another patron, Stone recognized her out-of-state plates and saw the opportunity to dig into her background. He had a habit of running license plates he didn't recognize, itching for any reason. Expired tags, outstanding warrants, anything at all to stir trouble. Finding no immediate red flags, Stone simply jotted down her license number on a small notepad and stowed it in his pocket. Let's keep an eye on this one, he muttered to Jacobs over a cup of coffee in the corner booth. The deputy nodded. In this town, that was all it took to mark someone as a potential problem. Neither man had a clue who Kendra really was or the resources at her disposal. They saw only her skin color and an out-of-state plate. And Judge Sinclair, for his part, had no inkling of the storm that was about to descend upon his courtroom. For years, he had orchestrated a theater of sham justice, confident in his unassailable position. But in the hush of that sweltering afternoon, the wheels of fate had already begun to turn, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test every fiber of his twisted sense of power. By the end of that day, Kendra would find herself in the crosshairs of a man whose arrogance and prejudice were about to collide with a force he had severely underestimated. As the sun dipped behind the pines, Grand Oak Falls braced for what would soon become the trial of the century. Later that evening, Judge Sinclair sat in his plush study, a personal sanctuary crammed with antique law books, old hunting trophies, and photographs that told tales of his privileged life. He sipped top-shelf whiskey from a crystal tumbler, reviewing the day's docket, when his phone rang. It was Officer Stone, calling about a suspicious person they had encountered in town. She's driving a dark gray sedan, license plates from Virginia, Stone explained, his voice jittery with excitement. We think she's up to something, hanging around the diner, asking questions about local businesses. Might be scouting for a burglary. Judge Sinclair leaned forward in his high-backed leather chair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. A burglary, you say? He asked, a smirk tugging at his lips. Well, it's been a while since we had some excitement. Keep me posted, Carl. Will do, Judge, Stone replied before adding. We'll see if we can't dig up a reason to bring her in. Sinclair paused. Just don't make it obvious. The paperwork's got to be airtight. You know the routine. Understood, Stone said. I've got Jacobs on it. The phone call ended, and Judge Sinclair reclined in his chair. This was exactly how the system worked. A phone call here, a falsified incident report there, all culminating in him doling out a harsh sentence that protected the community from perceived threats. In reality, the biggest threat was the corruption that coursed through the veins of Grand Oak Falls. Meanwhile, at a modest bed and breakfast on the quieter side of town, Kendra Thompson settled into a rocking chair on the wraparound porch. She had been driving for hours and was grateful for the chance to unwind. The scenery was beautiful. Spanish moss draped over ancient oaks, and the scent of gardenias hung in the humid air. Kendra opened her laptop. Little did the townspeople know that this unassuming woman was a high-ranking agent within the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Though typically based in Washington, D.C., with frequent visits to the J. Edgar Hoover Building, Kendra had come to Grand Oak Falls on a private mission. She was searching for a close friend's missing sister, a case that had personal significance. Her friend Sandra had last heard from her sister 6 months ago. The few clues Kendra had managed to gather pointed to this quiet town. The missing sister's name was Gloria Hayes, a young black woman of 25 who had dreamt of finding a simpler life away from the city. Her last text to Sandra said, "I'm close to something big. Wish me luck." After that, radio silence. Kendra had run every law enforcement database query possible. There were no official arrest records, no hospital admissions, nothing. It was as though Gloria had vanished into thin air. Kendra suspected foul play, and her worst fear was that Gloria had encountered a local authority figure who misused their power. In her FBI career, Kendra had witnessed more than her share of police misconduct cases quietly swept under the rug in small towns. Armed with her credentials and unwavering resolve, she intended to pull every thread she could find, hoping to unravel the mystery surrounding Gloria's disappearance. Her first stop had been the diner, where she quietly asked a few patrons if they recognized Gloria's photo. Responses varied from polite ignorance to outright suspicion. If anything, Kendra noted how people grew guarded the moment she revealed she was looking for a missing black woman. That reaction alone told her volumes about the local mindset. But Kendra was used to that. The FBI had taught her how to keep calm, remain polite, and persist. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a text from her direct superior at the Bureau, Special Agent in Charge Sylvia Vance. "Any leads on your personal time off?" The message read. Kendra had taken vacation days to make this trip, partially to keep it under the radar. She typed back, "Not yet, but I'll keep you posted." She omitted her location for security reasons, suspecting that lines could be tapped or her phone might be traced by local law enforcement if they discovered her identity. After tucking her phone away, Kendra breathed deeply. She had no idea that at that very moment, Officer Stone was reviewing security footage from the diner, searching for any sign that could be twisted into probable cause for an arrest. Stone felt an almost gleeful sense of anticipation. It wasn't every day an out-of-towner walked into his domain, and if that out-of-towner was a black woman asking too many questions, in his view, that was all the more reason to intervene. Deputy Jacobs, who was less zealous but equally complicit, offered to trail the suspect. In other words, to stalk Kendra if she went out again. They were hoping to catch her after dark, maybe weaving across the yellow lines, or simply looking suspicious, which in their repertoire was a broad definition they used to justify unwarranted stops. The stage was set: a cunning judge, two corrupt cops, and an FBI agent incognito. Each had their motivations. Each possessed a piece of the puzzle. And while Kendra remained unaware of the immediate danger she faced, her opponents were equally ignorant of her true capabilities. Before the night was through, an invisible snare would begin to tighten around Kendra, drawing her step by step into the lion's den. But Kendra was no lamb. She had taken on organized crime syndicates, terrorists, and serial offenders. She had endured the crucible of FBI training, sharpened her instincts through countless undercover missions. If Grand Oak Falls thought it could swallow her whole, it had another thing coming. The web of corruption was about to face its greatest challenge, a woman with the law and the truth on her side. At 9 o'clock sharp, Kendra decided to drive to a nearby gas station for a refill and to pick up some bottled water for her room. She eased her sedan onto the deserted streets. The moon glowed overhead, casting elongated shadows across the dark asphalt. Meanwhile, Officer Stone and Deputy Jacobs sat parked in an inconspicuous side street, headlights off, waiting like two vultures. The moment Kendra's sedan passed them, Stone pulled out and began to follow. He flicked on the squad car's camera, ensuring they had footage to justify whatever story they planned to concoct. Kendra, vigilant though she was, couldn't mistake the bright headlights in her rearview mirror. She tensed slightly, gripping the wheel tighter. At the gas station, Kendra got out and began filling up her tank. The squad car pulled in behind her, but neither Stone nor Jacobs approached right away. Instead, they observed, letting the tension build. Kendra finished pumping fuel, paid at the pump, and headed inside for water. The interior of the convenience store was brightly lit, the fluorescent hum a stark contrast to the quiet darkness outside. She grabbed a couple of bottles and approached the cashier, a timid teen who looked half asleep. When Kendra exited, Stone and Jacobs stood by her sedan. Jacobs's hand was resting on his sidearm, a clear intimidation tactic. Stone cleared his throat. "Evening, ma'am." "Good evening," Kendra replied in a neutral tone, her heart pounding. She wanted to avoid escalating the situation, but was fully prepared to assert her rights if necessary. "We got a complaint," Stone began, glancing at Jacobs to complete the sentence. Jacobs shifted uncomfortably, then added, "A complaint that someone matching your description was loitering around closed businesses, peering through windows." Kendra knew this was bogus. "I've just been at the diner, then my bed and breakfast, and now here for gas." Stone chuckled low. "That's so? Mind if we see your ID and registration?" Kendra nodded calmly. Showing identification was standard procedure if they claimed to have reasonable suspicion, though she doubted the validity of their excuse. She handed over her driver's license, which bore her real name, Kendra Thompson, but it did not indicate her affiliation with the FBI. That was a separate set of credentials she carried discreetly, only revealing them when absolutely necessary. She also produced her registration and proof of insurance. Stone studied the documents as if they contained hidden codes. "You're from Virginia," he stated, ignoring that her license clearly said so. "What brings you to Grand Oak Falls?" "Visiting a friend," Kendra replied, deliberately keeping the details vague. Jacobs, apparently taking his cue, chimed in. "That friend got a name?" Kendra offered a polite smile. "I'm not sure how that's relevant to your inquiry, officers." Stone's face hardened. "You're refusing to answer a direct question from law enforcement?" "Officers," Kendra said in a measured tone, "I've given you my identification. I'm not aware of any law that compels me to provide the name of my friend. If you suspect me of loitering or any crime, feel free to investigate properly, but I assure you, I've done nothing wrong." Stone closed in, close enough that Kendra could smell his stale coffee breath. We'll see about that. Without warning, he yanked Kendra's arm behind her back. I'm taking you in for resisting an investigation, and I suspect you might have some narcotics on you. We'll do a thorough search at the station. Kendra's eyes flared with shock. Narcotics? You have no reason. But before she could finish, Stone snapped a handcuff onto one wrist while Jacobs grabbed her other arm. The force they used was wholly unnecessary, but they seemed determined to make a show of it. As if on cue, Stone rattled off into his radio. We have a suspect in custody. Potential possession of controlled substances. Heading back to the station, he shot Kendra a triumphant glare, his eyes practically shouting, "What are you going to do about it now?" Kendra decided to remain silent. She knew that any protest would be twisted against her. She also knew she had a figurative ace up her sleeve, her FBI badge. Yet, the time wasn't right to reveal it. The moment it became known, she'd lose the element of surprise. She needed to gather as much information as possible on how this small-town corruption operated. She was placed in the back seat of the squad car, her wrists cuffed behind her. The drive to the station was quiet, save for the crackle of the police radio. Kendra's mind raced, but her expression remained stoic. She was formulating a plan, mentally going through FBI protocols for an undercover agent who finds themselves detained under false pretenses. Ironically, her training had not fully prepared her for the day when she would be the target of crooked cops. Still, she knew enough about chain of custody, police procedure, and legal recourse to navigate this storm. Upon arriving at the Grand Oak Falls Police Department, a small building with a flickering neon sign that read Police, Kendra was led inside. The desk sergeant, an older woman who seemed more weary than corrupt, looked surprised to see a new arrestee at this hour. Stone flashed a grin. Caught this one snooping around. Probably on something, he lied smoothly. The sergeant sighed, scribbled some notes, and indicated the direction of a single holding cell. It was dingy and reeked of stale perspiration. The overhead light buzzed ominously as Kendra sat on the metal bench. Stone stood on the other side of the bars, arms folded. You can make your phone call in a bit, he said, but I wouldn't get my hopes up. Kendra stared back at him, silent. She was calculating every move, every step that might lead her to deeper truths about this place, and, ultimately, to Gloria Hayes. If these men were brazen enough to arrest an innocent woman without cause, what else might they have done? Little did Stone and Jacobs know they were setting the stage for their own downfall. By orchestrating this staged arrest, they had just lured a far more dangerous foe into their lair. And soon, Judge Sinclair would join their little drama, with no inkling that the star of his next courtroom spectacle had the full weight of the Federal Bureau of Investigation behind her. Kendra spent the better part of the night in that cramped holding cell. Sleep was nearly impossible on the cold metal bench, but she dozed off in fits. Each time she jolted awake, she recalculated her situation. She was an FBI agent wrongfully detained on a personal mission. Her immediate priority was to secure her release without blowing her cover, but she also wanted to observe the process from the inside. If Stone and Jacobs were sloppy, they might reveal details about Gloria Hayes or other wrongful arrests. Information was power. Around sunrise, the desk sergeant came by with a paper cup of coffee and a stale donut. You want something to eat? She asked, her tone laced with reluctant kindness. Kendra accepted the offering. Thank you, she said softly. The sergeant lingered as if she wanted to say something, but ultimately turned away. Kendra wondered if there was any conscience left in this place, or if it had been eroded by years of complicity. Not long after, Stone appeared, rubbing his eyes. He hadn't slept much either. His uniform was rumpled, and his expression was one of mild annoyance, as if dealing with Kendra was a chore rather than the result of his own actions. We're going to process you now, he barked, unlocking the cell door. He escorted Kendra down a narrow hallway to a small booking room where Jacobs waited. They ran through the formalities, fingerprinting, photographing, and rummaging through her personal belongings. The inventory list included her wallet, car keys, phone, and a thin black card case that Kendra carefully handed over. She breathed a silent prayer that they wouldn't open it. Inside was her FBI badge, carefully hidden behind some spare business cards. The men, apparently too lazy or overconfident, simply tossed the card case into an evidence bag. Kendra exhaled softly, grateful for small mercies. Once they finished, Jacobs led her to an interrogation room, if one could even call it that. It was a cramped space with a single desk, a buzzing overhead light, and a mirrored window that likely served as a one-way glass. The air felt stale, as though too many wronged individuals had come through here, leaving behind their despair and anger. Stone and Jacobs took seats opposite her. Stone spoke first, leaning across the desk. "We got you on charges of loitering, resisting an investigation, and we'll add possession if the K-9 unit finds anything in your car." Kendra noted the casual mention of "if," knowing it was a fishing expedition. "Why don't you come clean?" Jacobs added nervously, tapping his fingers on the desk. "Tell us what you were really doing at those businesses." Kendra met their gazes calmly. "I don't have anything to hide. Check the car all you want. You won't find a thing because there's nothing to find." Stone smirked. "We'll see about that." The tension in the room was palpable. Kendra felt her pulse quicken, but her training had taught her to maintain composure. She offered them nothing more, letting them stew in their own assumptions. In the back of her mind, she was strategizing how to contact the FBI if this escalated. She also knew that legally, she should have been allowed a phone call by now, but these men were operating on their own rules. Several hours later, the door swung open to reveal Judge Marcus Sinclair, wearing a crisp suit and an expression of smug authority. Well, he drawled, stepping inside. "This is the woman who's causing such a fuss." Stone stood, his posture stiff with deference. "Yes, sir. We found her snooping around, and she refused to cooperate. She could be involved in something bigger. We just haven't pinned it down yet." Sinclair fixed his cold, steely gaze on Kendra. "Name?" "Kendra Thompson," she replied, returning his stare levelly. She noted every detail about him: the tailored suit, the gold cufflinks, the air of self-importance. He pressed his lips into a thin line. "You have a lawyer, Ms. Thompson." "I wasn't given the chance to call one," she said, a slight edge creeping into her voice. Sinclair looked at Stone and Jacobs. "Is that right?" Stone waved his hand dismissively. "We were waiting for you, Judge. We figured you'd want to get a read on her first." Kendra watched the interplay. It was a dance of corruption performed so openly, so brazenly, that it almost took her breath away. If they were this careless, how many people had they railroaded before? "Take her to my courtroom," Sinclair ordered. "We'll hold a preliminary hearing first thing this morning. If she's going to waste our time, we might as well move quickly." Kendra was led through a narrow corridor, her arms held by both Stone and Jacobs. They emerged into a small courtroom that was empty save for a bored court clerk, a single bailiff, and a scatter of curious onlookers. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glare, intensifying the already stifling tension. Sinclair took his seat at the bench. Kendra was made to stand before him. The clerk announced her name, charges, and case number. It all felt surreal, like she was trapped in a bad dream, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had a role to play, and for now, that role was of a woman who'd been ensnared by a corrupt system. "Ms. Thompson," Sinclair began in a measured tone that dripped with false civility. "You stand accused of loitering, resisting investigation, and potential possession of narcotics. How do you plead?" "Not guilty," Kendra replied, her voice steady. "And I'd like a lawyer." Sinclair nodded. "Of course you do. However, seeing as you're from out of town, that might take some time. I'd suggest you consider a public defender." Kendra knew that a local public defender, likely under Sinclair's thumb, would be no help, but she also knew the Constitution guaranteed her the right to legal counsel, even if it had to come from inside this rigged system. "That'll be fine," she said, choosing her words carefully. Sinclair pretended to glance over some documents. In reality, it was all a performance. "Bail is set at $5,000, he announced, his gavel striking the wood. "If you can't make bail, you'll remain in county lockup until your trial date, which is," he checked the clerk's notes, 2 weeks from now." Kendra suppressed a grimace. 2 weeks in lockup waiting for a sham trial? That was too long. She had to act sooner. But outwardly, she feigned resignation. "Understood," she said quietly. Sinclair stared down at her, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. "Court is adjourned." Stone and Jacobs wasted no time in yanking Kendra away, presumably to drag her back to the station. As they led her through the courthouse corridors, Kendra stole a glance at the windows where sunlight streamed through dusty panes. She felt a surge of determination. This was not how her story would end, not by a long shot. By the time these men realized who she truly was, it would be too late for them. The lion's den they had unwittingly created was about to become their own cage. Locked in a small cell at the county jail, Kendra waited patiently for the shift change. She needed the cover of routine to make her next move. Eventually, an officer with graying hair and tired eyes, different from Stone and Jacobs, came on duty. He looked at Kendra with something resembling empathy. Perhaps he was simply too close to retirement to indulge in the same brand of corruption. "Any phone call you need to make?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Yes, please," Kendra replied. He led her to a pay phone mounted on a wall, ignoring the suspicious glare from the departing officer. She dialed a memorized number, a direct line to an FBI contact in D.C. In coded language, she explained that she was visiting an old friend in Grand Oak Falls and had run into some unexpected legal trouble. She emphasized that it was urgent, dropping a hint that her credentials might be compromised if the local authorities got curious. Kendra hung up, her heart pounding. She had to trust that her colleagues at the J. Edgar Hoover building would decode her message and spring into action. They'd likely dispatch someone from a nearby field office to investigate or at least post bail. In the meantime, she'd continue to collect what evidence she could. As the day wore on, Kendra encountered a few other inmates, some of them visibly battered or withdrawn. She struck up cautious conversations, gleaning bits of information. One young man, barely out of his teens, whispered, "They said I was resisting arrest, but I wasn't. They just dragged me out of my car when I asked why I got pulled over." Another woman confided, "They do this. They plant evidence. They threaten if you push back. The judge throws the book at you." The stories confirmed what Kendra suspected. Stone, Jacobs, and Judge Sinclair had created a terror network under the guise of law and order, especially targeting marginalized people who lacked the means to fight back. Late in the afternoon, she heard the echo of footsteps in the hallway. Her cell door clanged open, revealing a grim-faced officer who said, "You got a visitor." Kendra was led to a small visitation room separated by a thick glass window. To her surprise, a familiar face appeared on the other side, Agent Victor Ramirez, a colleague from a nearby FBI field office. He picked up the phone on his side of the glass, and Kendra did the same. "What the hell is going on here?" he asked, voice hushed but urgent. Kendra explained the basics, careful to keep her tone low. "I came here looking for Gloria Hayes, a missing person. I got pulled over on bogus charges by a couple of corrupt cops. Judge isn't on it. They're railroading me into a trial in 2 weeks." Ramirez shook his head in disbelief. "We can get you out of here. Bail's only $5,000. The Bureau has discretionary funds for emergencies like this. But do you want out right now?" Kendra paused. "I need a little more time. I'm onto something bigger. I suspect the judge and these officers might be connected to more than just routine harassment. A missing person might be the tip of the iceberg. I want to see if I can get them to incriminate themselves further." "Understood," Ramirez said. "We'll keep a low profile then. But watch your back. These types can be dangerous if cornered." Kendra smiled grimly. "I know. Make sure you get a team on standby just in case. And if you can, look into the disappearance of Gloria Hayes. She was last seen around here." Ramirez nodded, scribbling notes on a small pad. "We'll do that. If you need extraction, use the code phrase DC Monument when you call. We'll come running." With a final look of concern, he said, "Stay safe." The officer on duty escorted Kendra back to her cell. Stone and Jacobs were nowhere to be seen, probably out drumming up more false charges elsewhere. Kendra mulled over her options. She could remain locked up until the hearing, risking further isolation, or she could post bail and move more freely around town. For the moment, she decided to stay put, hoping that direct observation would yield valuable insights. That evening, as darkness settled over the jail, Kendra heard muffled voices in the hallway. She edged closer to the cell door, pressing her ear against the cool metal. The voices belonged to Stone and Jacobs, discussing something about the files and making sure everything looked legit for the judge. Kendra couldn't catch every word, but the gist was clear. They were fabricating evidence to support her charges. The mention of sprinkling a little something in her trunk if we have to sent a chill down her spine. She swallowed her anger, forcing herself to remain calm. Tomorrow, during her next phone call, she'd tip off Ramirez that they might plant drugs in her car. With the FBI's resources, they could run a sweep and document any tampering. Days trickled by. Kendra stayed observant, comforting other inmates when she could and listening carefully to officers' passing chatter. Each day, she phoned Ramirez to update him. She suspected the local cops were tapped into jail phones, so she kept her language vague, focusing on coded references to extra insurance, planted evidence, and the neighbor's fence, someone else's property possibly containing hidden leads. On the fifth day, an unexpected development rattled her. Judge Sinclair himself paid her a visit. The guard escorted Kendra to a small interview room where the judge waited, arms crossed over his chest. His eyes flitted over her as though she were a bug he wanted to squash. "Ms. Thompson," he said, leaning forward, "I've been hearing you're causing a stir among the inmates, filling their heads with ideas of corruption and injustice. That's a dangerous path to tread." Kendra met his gaze, unwavering. "I'm just telling them to exercise their rights." Sinclair let out a disdainful chuckle. "Their rights? You think they have rights around here?" He stood abruptly, slamming his palm on the table. "You can walk out of here tomorrow if you plead guilty and pay a fine. Save yourself a long trial and the risk of additional charges." Kendra feigned consideration. "How much is the fine?" $2,000, he snapped. "And you leave this town, never come back." It was a bribe disguised as leniency. He wanted her gone before she could unravel more of his scheme. She pretended to think it over. "I'll consider it." Sinclair, satisfied that he'd planted a seed of doubt, pivoted on his heel and strode out. Once he was gone, Kendra allowed herself a small smile. The fact that he wanted her gone so badly only confirmed she was on the right trail. By the end of that day, she had made up her mind. She would post bail and re-enter the town as a free citizen. Remaining in jail risked them manufacturing even more evidence against her. At least on the outside, she could investigate leads and coordinate with Ramirez more openly. She was done being a pawn in Sinclair's rigged system. It was time to start playing offense and bring down the house of cards these men had built. Kendra posted bail the next morning, courtesy of funds discreetly routed from her FBI contact. The guard at the desk raised an eyebrow as she signed the release papers, but didn't comment. Stone and Jacobs were suspiciously absent, which was fine by Kendra. She wasn't in the mood to exchange barbs. Exiting the county jail, she squinted in the bright sunlight, feeling a surge of relief at being outside. She took a moment to collect herself and then headed straight to the parking lot. Her car was parked off to the side, dusty and forlorn. She walked around it slowly, checking for tampering. The trunk lock looked untouched, at least externally. Still, she'd have the FBI run a forensic sweep later. She drove to the local diner, hoping to blend into the morning rush. From a corner booth, she phoned Ramirez on a burner phone provided by the bureau. "I'm out," she said. "Meeting you in 30 minutes at the vacant gas station off Route 9. "Affirmative," Ramirez replied, bringing someone who might help. Kendra finished her coffee and left a few dollars on the table. She sensed the curious stares of some regulars. Word traveled fast in small towns, and she was already infamous. Still, no one said a word as she walked out. The vacant gas station was a relic of another era, its pumps long removed, windows boarded up. Ramirez's black SUV sat at the far end of the cracked pavement. Kendra parked nearby and approached warily. Ramirez emerged, accompanied by a woman in a sharp navy suit. "Kendra Thompson, meet Assistant U.S. Attorney Melissa Parker," Ramirez introduced. Parker extended her hand, her grip firm and professional. "I've heard a lot about you, Agent Thompson," Parker said. "We've got a situation, and it sounds like you've collected quite the evidence." Kendra nodded, quickly recapping her experience in jail, the false charges, and the potential involvement of Judge Sinclair in a broader scheme. "I suspect they're tied to multiple civil rights violations, possibly worse. A missing person named Gloria Hayes might be connected." Parker frowned. "We've seen a troubling pattern of complaints from this town over the years, but we never had enough concrete evidence to launch a federal probe. If we can substantiate your claims, especially with your testimony, it could be the leverage we need." Ramirez chimed in. "We also discovered that Gloria Hayes was arrested for disorderly conduct about 6 months ago. The official record ends there. No release date, no transfer, nothing. She's just gone." Kendra felt her stomach drop. That means she could still be in custody somewhere, or worse. "We need to find out what happened after that arrest." "That's where I come in," Parker said. "If you can help me gather proof, documents, testimonies, recordings, I can file an emergency injunction against Sinclair and the police department. It might be enough to bring in federal oversight." Kendra inhaled sharply, her resolve strengthening. "I'll do whatever it takes." They spent the next hour strategizing. Parker provided Kendra with a small digital recorder disguised as a key fob. Ramirez shared some infiltration tactics. Their plan hinged on luring Stone, Jacobs, or even Sinclair into admitting the truth about their conspiracy, especially about Gloria Hayes, on tape. Then, with solid evidence in hand, Parker could act swiftly. Before parting ways, Parker glanced at Kendra's battered sedan. "You sure you'll be safe driving around in that? They're probably watching you." Kendra shrugged. "I'll switch plates if needed. For now, I'll keep it. They expect me in this car, so it'll keep up appearances." "All right, but be careful," Parker warned. Back in town, Kendra began her new offensive. She visited the few local bail bond offices and discreetly asked about any detainee named Gloria Hayes. She inquired at the local library for newspaper archives, scouring for any mention of a young black woman arrested. She struck up conversations with townspeople who seemed sympathetic or at least less hostile. Most were tight-lipped, but a few let slip that Judge Sinclair often held closed-door sessions for cases too sensitive for the public. By dusk, Kendra had a partial lead. An older custodian at the courthouse recalled a night when Sinclair came in after hours. "He was with those cops," the custodian said softly, eyes darting around. "They had a young black woman. She looked scared out of her mind. I ain't never seen her again." Kendra's heart pounded. "Do you remember when that was?" He scratched his head. "Maybe 6 months back? I was cleaning the second floor. Heard her screaming. Sounded like they took her down the back stairs." "Thank you," Kendra whispered. She handed him a piece of paper with a burner phone number. "If you remember anything else, call me." That night, Kendra returned to her bed and breakfast. The owner gave her a wary look. Her stint in jail had apparently become local gossip, but said nothing as she handed over a room key. Kendra locked the door, set her phone to record any motion or sound outside, and laid out her notes across the bed. There was a strong possibility that Gloria had been detained off the record or perhaps harmed in the course of one of Sinclair's extrajudicial punishments. The local system was so riddled with corruption that a person could vanish without leaving a trace of paperwork. But if that was the case, how many others had suffered a similar fate? As her adrenaline subsided, exhaustion took hold. She needed sleep. Tomorrow, she'd confront Stone or Jacobs directly, wearing the hidden recorder. She'd hint that she knew about Gloria, gauge their reaction. If they took the bait and admitted to anything incriminating, she'd have the proof needed for Parker to act. As she drifted off, Kendra's last conscious thought was of Gloria Hayes, hoping against hope that she was still alive somewhere in Grand Oak Falls. Morning brought a sweltering heat that seemed to press down on Grand Oak Falls like a suffocating blanket. Kendra stepped out onto the sidewalk, scanning the street for any sign of police surveillance. Spotting none, she climbed into her sedan and drove toward the courthouse. She had made a plan with Ramirez and Parker. If she could catch either Stone or Jacobs alone, she'd try to push their buttons about Gloria Hayes. Sure enough, she spotted Stone's squad car parked across the street from the courthouse. He was leaning against the hood, chatting with another officer. Kendra took a deep breath, toggled on her disguised key fob recorder, and approached him. Stone's eyes narrowed when he saw her. "What do you want?" he sneered. Kendra stood tall, crossing her arms. "I want to talk about Gloria Hayes." The mention of Gloria's name made Stone stiffen. He glanced at the other officer, who muttered an excuse and walked away. "You'd better watch what you say," Stone warned, lowering his voice. Kendra feigned ignorance. "Why is that, officer? I heard she was arrested about 6 months ago and never seen again." "That's strange, don't you think?" Stone scoffed, though his eyes darted nervously. "She resisted arrest, assaulted an officer. We transferred her out of town." "Really? To where?" Kendra pressed. He shrugged, an exaggerated gesture. "None of your business." Then, in a harsh whisper, "Listen here, lady. This ain't your concern. If you value your safety, you'll drop it." Kendra smirked. "Or what? You'll frame me again? Plant drugs in my car? Whip up some new charges?" Stone took a step closer, his voice trembling with anger. "We can do worse than that. You have no idea who you're messing with." Kendra saw an opening and decided to nudge him further. "You mean I have no idea about your arrangement with the judge? How you funnel people into his courtroom and get them locked away on phony charges? How many times have you done it, Stone? How many innocents rotting in jail or missing?" He glared, eyes filled with venom. For a moment, she worried he might lash out physically, but he held back, probably aware of witnesses milling around. "You keep your mouth shut, or you'll end up like Gloria Hayes. Understand, Kendra's pulse thundered. She had it. An admission, albeit vague, that Gloria had been disposed of. The key fob recorder captured it all. She forced a neutral expression, spinning on her heel and walking away, hoping Stone wouldn't notice the slight tremor in her hands. Back in her car, she exhaled shakily. She called Parker and Ramirez on the burner phone. "Got something on tape," she said. "Stone basically threatened me." Referenced Gloria Hayes, implied they handled her. "It's not rock-solid proof, but it's enough to open an investigation." "Good work," Parker said, her voice tinged with urgency. "I'll file the necessary motions. We'll see if we can get a federal judge to sign off on warrants for the police station and the courthouse. Keep your head down, though. They might retaliate." Kendra nodded, forgetting for a moment that Parker couldn't see her. "I'll be careful. I think it's time for me to reveal my true identity, shake the cage. If they realize they've targeted an FBI agent, they might panic and make mistakes that lead us to Gloria." "Do it," Ramirez agreed. That afternoon, Kendra drove straight to the courthouse, marched into Judge Sinclair's chambers unannounced. The secretary outside the door jumped to her feet. "You can't go in there." Kendra ignored her, throwing open the heavy wooden door. Sinclair, seated at his desk, looked up in astonishment and then fury. "What is the meaning of this?" Kendra closed the door behind her. "I've had enough of your games, Judge." She reached into her wallet, pulled out her gleaming FBI badge, and held it up. "I'm Special Agent Kendra Thompson of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, operating under Title 18 authority." Sinclair's face turned the color of chalk. For a moment, he was speechless. Then he scoffed, trying to regain composure. "Is this some kind of trick? You can't just—" "I can and I have," Kendra interrupted, her tone icy. "I've been documenting everything. Your corrupt officers, your kangaroo court. I have recorded threats. You have nowhere to hide." He stood, fists clenched. "You think you can waltz in here and accuse me without proof?" Kendra took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I have enough to start a federal investigation, and I have a U.S. attorney ready to sign off on charges. You framed an FBI agent, Judge. Congratulations, you've made the biggest mistake of your career." Sinclair's bravado faltered, but he still attempted a sneer. "I am the law in this town. My word carries weight. Not above the Constitution," Kendra retorted, "and definitely not above federal scrutiny. Now, I want to know what happened to Gloria Hayes. I have reason to believe she was taken here off the record. Where is she?" Sinclair's eyes flickered with something, fear perhaps. He forced a laugh. "That's hearsay, and you have no proof." "You sure about that?" Kendra said, her voice dropping to a dangerous hush. "Because your buddy Officer Stone just let slip that they handled her. Sounds like a confession to me." A bead of sweat trickled down Sinclair's temple. "Get out of my office," he snapped, desperately trying to maintain authority. "This conversation is over." Kendra didn't move. "I'm not leaving until you tell me what happened to Gloria Hayes." He glared, then pressed a button on his desk phone. "Security. Remove this woman from my chambers." Within seconds, 2 burly security guards entered. Kendra held up her badge again. "I'm a federal agent. Unless you want to be charged with obstruction, I suggest you let me go about my business." They hesitated. Sinclair's face contorted with rage. "I'll have you arrested." Kendra shook her head. "The jig is up, Judge. You know it, and I know it. You might delay the inevitable for a few days, but my team is already here. They'll be serving federal warrants soon. I suggest you start thinking about cooperation if you want any sort of plea deal." Sinclair stared at her, a maelstrom of hatred and panic swirling in his eyes. Finally, he barked at the guards. "Escort her out of the building." The guards moved forward, but gently now, mindful of her badge. Kendra allowed them to guide her to the door. As she left, she delivered one final shot over her shoulder. "You'll answer for every life you've ruined." Her heart thundered as she stepped back into the corridor. She knew she had just lit the fuse on a powder keg. Sinclair would scramble to cover his tracks, maybe even destroy evidence. But that was why Ramirez and Parker were ready with immediate warrants. The big reveal was done. The wolves had been provoked. Now all that remained was to see how swiftly justice would descend on Judge Sinclair and his cronies. The next morning at dawn, an unmarked convoy of black SUVs and sedans rolled into Grand Oak Falls. Ramirez led the operation, coordinating with a squad of FBI agents and U.S. Marshals. Assistant U.S. Attorney Parker had secured rapid federal warrants to search the courthouse, the police station, and Judge Sinclair's home. Officially, It was described as part of a federal inquiry into allegations of civil rights violations. Kendra watched from a distance as the agents poured out, guns holstered but badges gleaming. Her heart raced with a mix of anticipation and dread. She wanted answers, especially about Gloria Hayes. Part of her feared that the worst had already happened. Within hours, the FBI seized documents and computer hard drives from the courthouse. They combed through Stone's and Jacobs's patrol cars, searching for hidden compartments or stashes of planted evidence. The men themselves were nowhere to be seen. A rumor circulated that they'd fled the moment they saw the convoy roll in. Warrant in hand, Kendra joined a team of agents at the county jail, where they interviewed inmates about their arrests, searching for anyone who had seen or heard Gloria Hayes. As the hours dragged on, Kendra began to fear they might not find any definitive trace of Gloria. Then came a break. A young FBI analyst found a hidden folder in the courthouse system, cleverly disguised under property tax records. Inside were sealed court documents, transcripts of a secret hearing with Gloria Hayes listed as the defendant. The charges were vague, referencing national security concerns. The transcript ended abruptly with a note about temporary transfer to a secure facility. Kendra's breath caught in her throat. She and Ramirez read through the documents, stunned. National security concerns? That's obviously a front, Ramirez muttered. They must have taken her somewhere off the record. Or worse, Kendra whispered. She read the last page again and again, searching for a clue. Finally, she found it. A reference to a property outside Grand Oak Falls. Sinclair had apparently signed an order remanding Gloria to a private facility due to alleged threats she had made against local officials. The address was partially redacted, but a partial clue remained. Elmwood Acres. Kendra recalled the name from local gossip. Elmwood Acres was an abandoned plantation on the outskirts of the county. Locals whispered it was haunted or cursed, but more plausibly, it was private land that seldom drew prying eyes. Brimming with urgency, Kendra rushed to Parker, showing her the excerpt. Parker's eyes widened. Go, Parker said. Take a team. Now. Kendra, Ramirez, and 4 other agents sped out of town, following winding roads through thick woods until they reached a rusted gate bearing a faded sign that read Elmwood Acres. The gate hung precariously on its hinges, and beyond it, an overgrown driveway disappeared into dense foliage. With guns drawn, the team advanced carefully, the crunch of gravel underfoot sounding ominously loud. At the end of the driveway stood a crumbling mansion, vines creeping up its columns. Kendra's pulse pounded. Was Gloria here? Alive? The agents fanned out, clearing each room on the ground floor. It was mostly empty, littered with broken furniture and rodent nests. Then one of the agents shouted from the back of the mansion. Kendra raced over to find a locked metal door leading down to what appeared to be a basement or cellar. Ramirez tried the handle, locked from the outside. With a swift kick, he busted it open. The smell of damp earth and mildew wafted up. They descended a narrow staircase, flashlights cutting through the darkness. At the bottom, they found a makeshift holding area, an old wine cellar converted into a prison cell. Inside, huddled in a corner, was a frail woman with tangled hair and tear-streaked cheeks. Kendra's heart leapt into her throat. Gloria, she called, voice echoing off the stone walls. The woman stirred, blinking in the harsh flashlight beam. Who are you? She whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. We're here to help, Kendra said, fumbling with a ring of keys left on a hook by the door. She found the right one, unlocked the cell, and rushed inside, dropping to her knees beside Gloria. You're safe now. My name is Kendra Thompson. I'm FBI. Gloria stared at her in disbelief, tears welling in her eyes. Oh God, I thought no one would ever find me. Ramirez gently helped her stand, draping a jacket around her shoulders. We've got you, he assured. We'll get you medical attention. Tears of relief streamed down Kendra's face as well. The swirl of anger, pity, and triumph overwhelmed her. Gloria Hayes was alive, bruised, traumatized, but alive. Outside, paramedics arrived shortly after the FBI's radio call. They whisked Gloria into an ambulance, checking her vitals. She managed to mumble that she had been threatened repeatedly by Stone and Jacobs, who claimed they were acting on orders from the judge. They had kept her out of sight whenever federal agencies inquired, feeding her only enough to keep her alive but terrified. By nightfall, News of Gloria's rescue reverberated through Grand Oak Falls. The once loyal supporters of Judge Sinclair recoiled in horror, confronted with undeniable proof of his tyranny. Meanwhile, Stone and Jacobs were apprehended just over the state line after a high-speed pursuit with state troopers. They were brought back in handcuffs, faces drawn with fear and defeat. As the FBI led them into the county jail they once controlled, Kendra locked eyes with Stone. His defiance was gone, replaced by a haunted look. Sinclair, too, was arrested at his home, marched down his manicured lawn in a wrinkled bathrobe, wrists shackled. The man who once lorded over the town with smug arrogance now looked small, broken, consumed by the weight of his crimes.